The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious.
He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is absolutely killing us.
President Biden on the back foot, stumbling in the first presidential debate, struggling to counter attacks and false claims from his Republican rival Donald Trump.
EU leaders nominate Ursula Von Der Leyen and Costa and Kallas for the bloc's top jobs, despite opposition from Hungary and Italy.
Plain and simply like to express my gratitude to the leaders who endorsed my nomination for a second mandate as President of the European Commission. And I'm very honored and I'm delighted.
Well, take a look at this. The Japanese yen continuing to slide, trading near its weakest level in almost 4 decades as the country names a new currency chief. And how important is this for a barometer of the US consumer? I think it's huge. Nike issuing a big sales warning, sending the sneaker stock plummeting 12% lower in extended trade.
A big night in US politics as President Biden and former President Trump have faced off in the first US presidential debate of this election cycle, hosted by CNN. The two men, neck and neck in the polls, clashed over the economy, US support for Ukraine, and hot-button domestic issues including abortion and immigration. Bree Jackson from NBC News joins us from Washington, D.C. Bree, this was an unusual debate, different rules set this time round. Just run us through some of the highlights.
Hi there, Karen. So today we're already getting reaction, or at least we're getting reaction from both campaigns. President Biden's allies, they say the president started off slow, but then he came back, while former President Trump's team is celebrating the debate as a clear-cut victory for Trump. Now, this was the first presidential debate and a chance for both candidates to speak directly to voters, and you could see the disdain between the two. They did not shake hands, and they did not hold back the verbal insults in this historic debate. Take a look.
Over billion.
Insults flying during an historic rematch.
He was the worst in all of American history.
If he wins this election, our country doesn't have a chance.
President Biden and former President Trump taking the stage for the first presidential debate of 2024, hosted by CNN, squaring off on a top issue for voters, the economy.
By the time he left, things were in chaos, literally chaos.
He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country.
The two oldest candidates to ever run for president, sparring over decades-old issues, including reproductive rights.
What I did is I put 3 great Supreme Court justices on the court, and they happened to vote in favor of killing Roe v. Wade and moving it back to the states.
If I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
The president directly accusing Trump of inciting the January 6th attack.
This guy is responsible for doing what was done. He did do a damn thing, and these people should be in jail.
Each taking their stance on domestic issues and setting out clear differences on foreign policy.
Every time that Zelensky comes to this country, he walks away with $60 billion. He's the greatest salesman ever.
He has no idea what the hell he's talking about. And by the way, I got 50 other nations around the world to support Ukraine.
Personal jabs were also thrown. President Biden pouncing on the former president's legal troubles.
How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star?
Trump mocking Biden's verbal stumbles.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Two presidential candidates with two very different visions for the future. And the current and former president were both trying to throw knockout punches during the debate and hoping to take home the prize of not only winning over the voters, but also trying to win a second term in the White House. The next debate is scheduled for September.
Bree, thank you so much for bringing us the coverage. Bree Jackson there. Let's get to Thomas Gift, who is Director of the Centre on US Politics at University College London, joining us from DC today. Thomas, let's just get to the debate. This was one where the market was looking for certain cues from President Biden, from President Trump. This was voters setting up, looking for what the contest would look like for later this year. Biden just had to show that he wasn't too old to do the job, and it seems like he just didn't manage to do that. Talk us through the significance as we have voters still undecided, but it's a very narrow contest.
Well, I think your assessment was exactly right. Joe Biden really had one job last night, and that was to prove to Americans that he was up to the task of serving as president for 4 more years at 81 years old. And I think the consensus is that he didn't do that. The bar was set pretty low because Donald Trump had spent months and months and months attacking Biden, saying that he wasn't fit, saying that he didn't have the mental acuity or the physical vigor to be president. And so what Joe Biden really needed to do was come up on stage and prove that that wasn't true. Beyond all of the policy debates and sort of the lies that Trump told both last night and before, Joe Biden just really wasn't able to effectively debate. And there's a lot of hand-wringing right now among Democrats as to whether this is really sort of the death knell of Joe Biden.
Really, really interesting getting a lot of the analysis on this, Thomas. Democrats on Capitol Hill are just in aggressive panic, some people have been saying as well. Look, here's the historical analysis. Walter Mondale, Mitt Romney, John Kerry, they've all won debates against incumbents, but have not become the US president as well. Is this as bad as it looks for the Democrats and for Joe Biden?
Well, right now, certainly it does. And if you talk to surrogates and representatives and high-level officials on Capitol Hill, the word is that there is just a huge amount of concern. There was a large amount of concern going into this debate, of course, but that was mostly among progressives who wanted to replace Joe Biden with someone who is more consistently on the left. But now you're seeing moderates as well saying maybe this isn't the right decision. But really the time to change horses isn't now, right? It was several months ago. And Joe Biden said that he was determined to see this thing through. I still do think that he's going to see this thing through. He still has another debate where maybe he can make up some ground. It's also the case that these two candidates offer such radically different plans for what America could look like that I still don't know if the debate is going to be the ultimate decider for most Americans. But on the fence, for those on the fence and those moderate and swing voters, it's hard to look at that debate last night and say that Joe Biden is the best candidate for president. It's
having done a vast amount of reading as I can on this and speaking to experts such as yourself, it seems before the Chicago DNC, there's only one route to replace Joe Biden, and that is Joe Biden stepping aside as well. Is it too late for a Whitmer, a Pritzker, a Newsom or a Harris to step in?
Well, it's not too late, but it's going to have to be Joe Biden's decision. And I do think that there's going to be some reflection after last night as to whether he wants to continue on this campaign. One of the problems, though, for Democrats is that there is no clear, obvious successor who can beat Donald Trump. I mean, typically you would think the vice president, that's Kamala Harris, but her approvals are even lower than Joe Biden. And if you look at some of the other names that you just mentioned, like Gavin Newsom, like Gretchen Whitmer, they're not tested on a national scale, right? And we see that sometimes that's problematic. In the Republican primaries, there was so much enthusiasm, for example, with Ron DeSantis. And then he got to the national stage and voters decided that they didn't like him. So essentially, the challenge here is, do we want to go with the president that we know, right? Or do we want to step into the unknown? And in some respects, the unknown could even be worse than the status quo.
Thomas, let me bring up Trump because the tactics around this debate are slightly different, not playing necessarily to his advantage where there was no audience. We know Trump likes to play to a crowd. Also mute buttons for the moderators. If we consider his style that he took to this debate, much more sophisticated approach, direct attacks on Biden, also not butting in as much. Just give us a sense as to how you thought he performed on the night.
Well, it's interesting. So much of the conversation is around Joe Biden, but it's also notable how Trump performed, as you note. And I actually think that the mute button and some of the rules, even if you might not think that that benefited Trump, in the end actually did. Because if you go back to 2020, one debate in which Donald Trump did not perform well, and there was broad consensus that he was kind of too belligerent, too insulting, interrupted too much. He wasn't able to do it because that mute button, right? And so that was sort of a built-in restraint for him. It's not his style, but I think that it actually played to his advantage. And he did throughout the entire night maintain a level of discipline that we really haven't seen from him in quite some time. I think he got good advice going into this debate that you don't want to just come off as a blowhard. And so I think this debate was just as much about Donald Trump's performance as it is about Joe Biden's.
The economy and immigration, certainly key issues for voters, and the prominence in the debate also just suggesting the significance of those two topics. How did you think both sides tackled this issue when the economy, let's face it, has been more resilient, and on immigration there's still enormous issues to sort out, but bipartisan support has fallen by the wayside?
Well, I think on those two issues, just if you look at the polling, Donald Trump has an advantage. And so I'm not sure if Joe Biden can really make up that ground. And the economy, lots of Americans are still pessimistic, despite the fact that there are some positive indicators. Employment is still good. Growth is reasonable relative to some other Western OECD countries. But there's still that sense of inflation and price hikes and increases in the cost of living that Donald Trump was able to land some blows on last night. And on immigration, this has risen really to the number one issue in most polls for Americans in terms of what's the most important problem facing this country. We all know that this is an issue on which Donald Trump really pressed whenever he was president, build the wall and so on. And so I think that's also advantaged Trump right now. Lots of indicators seem to suggest that Trump certainly has the edge at the moment.
Thomas, thank you so much for the analysis and for staying up so late for us after 1 o'clock in the morning there, so we do appreciate it. Thomas Gift with us, Director of the Centre on US Politics, University College London.
The most embarrassing thing, though, about the debate, I thought, was the fact that you got two of the most senior politicians in the world arguing about their golf handicap.
Yes, at the end, yes.
It's just like,
about carrying the bag.
Seriously, who cares whether you're a 6 or an 8, whether you're carrying your own bag or not? It's just like, it just seemed, they couldn't, neither of them could let it go as well.
It was an age barb though, wasn't it? Can you what's your swing like? How much can you carry around the golf course?
It's like, why do Americans actually care about their hand? But neither of them would let it go. And, I think that's a shame for both candidates. Anyway, what's the IMF saying about the US?
Well, this is a big one. We had an assessment of the European economy the other week. Now, this time for the US, as the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, has urged the US to raise taxes to curb its rising debt burden, warning the country risks hitting unsustainable levels of borrowing. Georgieva met with US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen after the fund revised down its GDP growth forecast for the year by 10 basis points to 2.6%.
There's a lot to say about that. We'll come back to that because the numbers look horrible. Again, I talk about both candidates and we can be very apolitical about this. The fact of the matter is the fiscal positions I've been banging on for about 2 years because I've been looking at the CBO data is not good, whichever president. Whether it gets worse under one or the other, we will do a lot of analysis for you, but it doesn't look great. US GDP, meanwhile, this was an uptick. This was a positive bit of data. Grew 1.4% on the year in the first quarter, slightly higher than expectations. However, a rise in imports and a fall in inventory investment weighed on performance. Meanwhile, initial jobless claims jumped to a 2.5-year high in mid-June, implying, again, a softening labour market amid slowing economic growth. It was the continuing claims that were perhaps the most concerning for those who want to see more job creation as well. The market So I would probably say the market's interesting, but what happened after hours was even more interesting. I know you're going to come to that.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The market saw Trump showing the debate as stronger than Biden, and we saw some movement in futures on the back of that. Fascinating to see, given we're so far out still from the presidential election in November. What we had on markets in session yesterday, though, a slight nod again to the hopes that there could be an interest rate cut in sight. Markets assessing the data this week, and in particular jobless claims, those benefits drifting. And what we had in terms of the market reaction, you've got to say 1/3% up on the NASDAQ at this stage. So green moving on to the tech sector. We've seen that as a feature just in the last couple of sessions, where tech is again back in favour, slightly higher on the Dow and the S&P, but a lot of talk around the end of quarter, end of half-year window dressing that's been taking place this week as we count down to the 30th of June. So a little bit green again on the boards. Let's take a look at Treasuries. This is the market reaction. We're 4.30 on that 10-year yield. We're 4.72 at the short end. So we are positioned a little bit firmer on those yields at this stage. Let's take a look at the dollar consequences in that morning session. Everything mostly on the back foot versus greenback. Cable, we're 126.25. Again, we're in countdown to an election here. When it comes to euro, French politics too inside, 106.89.90 roughly. We're down about 1/10%. Dollar firmer versus the Japanese yen as well, 160.98, despite lots of intervention talk again and lines in the sand for the Japanese. The dollar scooping up another 1/10%. The Asian markets, as we roll on through that Friday session, positive today. It was weaker yesterday. We saw that negative tone, but we bounced back into firmer territory, particularly on Chinese stocks, up more than 1%. Other major markets, a bit more modest, you've got to say. If you look at the Australian performance to Hong Kong, up 1/3%, and a little bit stronger out of the Japanese market, but perhaps again down to that window dressing as we count down to the end of the half, Steve.
Thank you, Karen. So much to discuss on this show. Coming up, the European Council meets in Brussels as Ursula von der Leyen is confirmed, grande surprise, confirmed for a second term at the helm. And I think this is arguably the most important day for many of you for the news out of Nike. I think it's huge. Nike and H&M disappointing. H&M during this show yesterday, Nike overnight. We'll get the latest from the retail sector with second quarter earnings around the corner. Plus France heading to the polls on Sunday. First round with the hard right expected to sweep to victory. Well, at least in the first round. We're going to get a take from the left with Vincent Boulet, who is spokesperson for the French Communist Party. That is coming up at 7:45 Central European Time.
Ambition to me is about doing better.
I think ambition creates a pathway.
The best advice I can give to someone starting off a career is don't have a career, have lots of careers, try loads of different things.
Talk to people and put your ambition out there.
I don't feel that I've hit peak ambition because it's a learning journey.
CNBC is where ambition meets opportunity. What does living ambitiously mean to you? Hear it from our CNBC anchors, reporters and global business leaders on CNBC.com.
EU leaders have agreed to nominate Ursula von der Leyen for a second term as the president of the EU Commission. The bloc leaders have also picked former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa as the president of the EU Council and nominated Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas as the next foreign policy chief. The three nominees received broad support from European leaders, but there were a few holdouts. Speaking after their nominations, Kallas and Costa promised to preserve unity among member states.
There's war in Europe, but there's also growing instability globally that also are the main challenges for the European foreign policy. My aim is definitely to work for the European unity, protect European interests, values in the charged geopolitical context and build global partnerships as well, which is very, very important at this time.
Europe and the world are facing challenging moments, yes, but the European Union has demonstrated its resilience in the past, always finding strength in unity. And building unity between member states will be my main priority when I take up my position in December.
Let's get out to Sylvia for more. Sylvia, Italy's Giorgia Meloni was meant to be the kingmaker here after the sweep to the right that we saw during the parliamentary elections. She's railed against some of these nominations. Why was she so unsuccessful?
Well, this is not a done deal yet. This is basically the moment where we see the EU leaders coming together on choosing the next top jobs. But these top jobs, these names have yet to be approved by the European Parliament. So I just want to give you some color in terms of what happened here last night. One high-level source told me this morning that the conversations on top jobs were not amicable and that Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, was very upset. On top of that, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, was also upset in his own way regarding the discussions on top jobs. We knew for several weeks that Giorgia Meloni had been upset with the idea that the Liberals, the Socialists and the Conservatives came together without her party to discuss these top jobs. On top of that, now the question mark is whether Ursula Von Der Leyen is going to be approved by the European Parliament. And the same source told me this morning that this is basically a huge concern at this stage. This person is very worried about the vote because it will be very tough and it is not guaranteed that Ursula von der Leyen will get approved by the lawmakers. Let's not forget that that vote, which is due to take place in mid-July, is secret. So the lawmakers could vote the way that they want and ultimately not approve a second mandate for von der Leyen. Let's see what's going to happen. But ultimately, though, what we saw last night was actually a very efficient summit because they were meant to be here for 2 days and ultimately they managed to discuss everything in one day. But going back to the concerns raised by the Prime Minister of Italy, I had the chance to speak to some of the negotiators from the Conservative group. That's Donald Tusk and Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece. And they told me that they were trying to do was actually to be efficient in choosing the next top jobs, that they have a majority in the European Council, they have a majority in the European Parliament, and what they were trying to do was not to upset anybody, but ultimately to make these conversations efficient. Here's Donald Tusk and Mitsotakis, the Prime Ministers of Poland and Greece.
One thing must be clear. No one respects Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and Italy more than I do, really. And it's a misunderstanding that, okay, sometimes we need specific political platforms to ease the process. The common position of these three biggest groups in the European Council. We, as you know, we have ended our negotiations inside this political platform, but this is only to facilitate the process here. The decision is for Madam Meloni and other leaders during our European Council meeting, and the only intention and the only reason why we have prepared this common position is to facilitate this process, really. And there is no Europe without Italy, and there is no decision without Prime Minister Meloni. It's obvious.
The three political families discussed between ourselves and coming up with a proposal. At the end of the day, it is up to the European Council to make the decision. This proposal is a proposal that reflects, the overwhelming majority of the Council members. Again, I need to stress that this is not an exclusive process. It was never our intention either to exclude anyone or to offend anyone. I have a lot of respect personally for Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. Italy is a very important country in the European Union, and I'm sure we'll address all these issues and concerns in the discussions that we will have.
So the bottom line here was that Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, she abstained on the vote for von der Leyen as the next president of the European Commission, and Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, voted against her. Now all eyes are on the European Parliament to see whether or not von der Leyen will be successful in getting a second mandate as the president of the European Commission. Now, we are here also at a moment when Brussels is seeing the start of this new political cycle. We have these new names, but we also now have clear priorities for the next 5 years. And no doubt that security and defense are top of the agenda. And with that in mind, we had the President of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, joining the 27 here. He came to Brussels to sign a new security deal with the EU. And on top of that, I had the chance to ask him whether he's concerned about the political uncertainty in Europe, particularly in France.
I'm sure that everything basing on support of people, ordinary people, you know, the leaders, parties, political leaders and governments always basing their thoughts and decisions only on society support. And that's why I hope that even if, of course, that is the decision, you know, election, that is the decision of one or another country. We can't push it and we don't want it. That's about freedom. That's, by the way, about values which we are fighting for. So, and that's why I hope that mostly countries will be on the right side of history, on our side.
So President Zelensky there, and not just with the elections in France, but also with the elections in the US, there's naturally a lot of concerns about what these will mean for the future of Ukraine in terms of support. So getting this new security deal with the EU was a very important step for Zelensky, but no doubt this is likely to be another key theme for the EU itself for the next 5 years as we see these new faces, some new faces arriving here in Brussels.
Thank you for listening to Squawk Box Europe Express.
For more market-moving news, you can head to CNBC.com.
Or join us again on the show with Steve Sedgwick, Karen Cho, and myself, Arabi Lekumete, weekdays on CNBC.